I want to acknowledge my co-author, Nicole Biggert. She's the director of the UC Davis Energy Efficiency Center. We are both economic and organizational sociologists, and we are embedded in a bunch of technology centers. We've got a lighting center and a cooling center and a water efficiency center, and they decided to bring in some social scientists because the challenges of energy efficiency, technology adoption, and behavior change aren't just about the technologies, they're also social, political, economic questions. So I'm going to talk about a growing religious environmental movement in the United States that has emerged from the secular environmental movement. And I'm going to describe some of the field work that we've been doing for the past 2 years with interfaith social change organizations that help congregations integrate environmental stewardship into their mission and ministry. And I will discuss this as an example of how cities can leverage existing social institutions within their communities. And I'll talk a little bit about how we've begun to do this within the city of Davis. I want to acknowledge two people that many of you have probably met already here today. Chris Granger, the executive director of Cool Davis, and Mitch Sears, who is the sustainability program manager at the city of Davis. And he'll be sharing more about the work that the city of Davis is engaged in the panel later today. So I want to give you a brief overview of how sociologists think about economic action, think about how we can leverage existing social institutions for community engagement and behavior change, talk a little bit about this growing religious environmental movement and how they're the challenges, because we wanted to be very candid and talk about the challenges. Some of the challenges that faith and lay leaders face in trying to do something that really is ideologically novel. It's not as well integrated as feeding the hungry or sheltering the homeless for faith communities to talk about environmental action within their communities. So many of you probably work with utilities, municipal utilities, investor-owned utilities in your cities to do some of this work. And I think it's helpful to think about the dominant social science behind mainstream energy efficiency programs, which is, of course, economics. And if you're designing for a rational, self-interested, utility-maximizing individual, you're going to design rebate and incentive programs. You're going to emphasize the cost savings associated with adopting new energy efficiency technologies. We've moved beyond that a little bit. Probably many of you are getting these more detailed utility bills that show your energy consumption as compared with your neighbors. You may have seen on the bottom it says powered by O-Power, an innovative company that's partnering with a lot of utilities to get the data that looks at your energy consumption relative to your neighbors in similarly sized homes. And the insight behind that, the social science discipline is social psychology, and that normative pressures exist and that we want to orient our actions towards the norm. So if you find out that you're using a lot more energy than your neighbors, you'll feel some social pressure to reduce. And they've been able to document savings on the order of 1% to 2% across populations who receive these more detailed utility bills and those that don't. But in both of these models, the unit of analysis is the individual. And as a sociologist, I'm trained to think about groups of people within institutional settings: family, work, education, religion. These are the places where we learn what's logical, what's appropriate, what's normal. So I also want to help you see a way that economic sociologists like to think about economic action. And this is an empirically derived typology that was published in an article by my co-author, Nicole Biggert, and Rick Delbridge. It was published in the Academy of Management Review, and her typology is called Systems of Exchange, and it's ways of thinking about economic action from a sociological perspective. And that rational, self-interested, utility-maximizing actor is well captured in that upper left quadrant, that price system of exchange, which is what we're told is the main driver behind economic action, the decision to buy a new technology, to hire someone for a particular job. I'm going to be focusing on the two bottom quadrants, these more substantive rationales that underlie a lot of economic exchange. So, there's a moral system of exchange. The reason that you buy that environmentally friendly household cleaner or that fair trade banana is because you may want to align your action with a particular value or ethic. A communal system of exchange reflects the reality that when you've got a big stack of resumes and you see someone from your alma mater, you're more likely to interview them. We exchange preferentially with people that we identify with. So recognizing that there are multiple logics that inform economic action can help us develop more socially realistic models that can inform better design of programs. It also builds on Nicole's work studying the direct selling industry. She wrote a book called Charismatic Capitalism, where she looked at direct selling organizations like Tupperware and Mary Kay and Amway and Cutco Knives, which really seek to leverage people's existing social relationships to sell stuff. And this is from a recent New York Times article that the solar industry has taken a similar page, and having neighbors talk about how much they love their solar panels and how much they've saved on their utility bills to encourage them to go solar. And I know that we're thinking about doing something similar in the city of Davis. We're calling them lighthouses, L-I-T-E, but lighthouses, beacons in the community of particularly low resource using households, to have folks share with their neighbors what type of measures they've implemented, if it's weatherization, better insulation, solar panels. And so starting at the city level and sharing with you some of the things we're doing in the city of Davis, one of the first things, and I've heard this discussed here, you want to map out your existing resources, that you recognize that you're not starting from scratch. That starting from scratch is a pretty surefire way for disaster, and I don't think anyone in this room would make that mistake. But I'm reminded of examples when well-intentioned folks have tried to divide up the world in ways that are meaningful to them. I spent some time in Italy, and there was an effort to devolve power from the central government to the 20 regions within Italy. And the problem was that no one in Italy really identified with their region. People didn't identify with Lazio, they identified with being from Roma. So sometimes it's just not a very effective, this was a 2-year commission that was eventually abandoned. But sometimes we want to just divide things up in ways that are convenient for us, but you really need to start with what are the existing social institutions in your community. So Davis is very rich. We've got kind of the polar opposite of the abandoned neighborhoods that Eric Kleinenberg described last night. We've got a 40-year-old food cooperative, a really well-established farmers market. We have been recognized by the League of American Bicyclists for all of our biking infrastructure. They've encouraged us to go diamond because we've already been classified platinum because of all of our green belts and bike paths. So this is a progressive, well-educated community. We've got the University of California, Davis. So we're thinking, how can we push ourselves forward? And we've got some very ambitious goals. We want to engage 75% of the city's population in carbon emissions reductions programs by 2015. And we want the city to be carbon neutral by 2050. So if you're going that big, we've got a good base, but if you're going that big, you need to use every possible institution in your community that you can. And so recently we've started thinking about how we can engage with our faith community. So we had, just earlier this month, we were supposed to have it last month, but then it was on Super Bowl Sunday, and the 49ers got into the Super Bowl, so we decided to postpone it to March 3rd. And it was called Climate Crisis, Putting Faith in Action. We had over 80 people from the community show up from different congregations in Davis. We had interfaith songs and prayers. Susan Stevenson, the executive director from Interfaith Power and Light, came and gave a talk. I'll be talking more about Interfaith Power and Light. We had a climate scientist from the university come and talk about climate change, making the very real recognizing that there doesn't have to be this big divide between science and faith, that they can work together. We also had these breakout groups, and there was an interesting example that was shared in a couple different breakout groups of an environmental tithe that the Quakers decided that for every gallon of gasoline that they purchased, they would donate $1 to environmental efforts in their congregation. And then the Methodists were doing something similar, but they were donating all the funds to a local charitable organization. But tithing is something that's well established in faith communities. And that organization came from the ground up. The idea came from the ground up, the importance of doing something that's meaningful within that local context. So California Interfaith Power and Light. In the center you've got the Reverend Sally Bingham. She's an Episcopal priest. She started Interfaith Power and Light in San Francisco a little over a decade ago. They've now got 14,000 member congregations in 40 states. This is some images from the annual California Interfaith Power and Light Energy Oscars. Ed Begley Jr., I don't know if you can see him on the left with the certificates, was the MC one year. We've got the Oakland Interfaith Gospel Choir. the Tassajara Zen Buddhist Center, they did an entirely passive house. So they've recognized congregations for their work in different areas, in energy efficiency, in green building, in advocacy, education. This is a sidewalk renovation project in San Francisco. But part of this work is recognizing congregations publicly, creating mutual awareness of what other congregations are doing. So obviously knowledge and idea sharing, but also making it socially legitimate to do this type of work, that it's not seen as deviant or strange for faith communities to be engaged in this type of action. And another organization on this coast, New Jersey-based Green Faith, has some really valuable programs that are similar to things that I've heard talking with folks here today. And I know the importance of having faith leaders and community leaders learn from each other and provide support for each other. I mean, that's something that we're all getting here in our work here at the Garrison Institute. This is Fletcher Harper. He's the executive director of Green Faith, and he's spoken here at the Garrison Institute. And the leadership program is an 18-month fellowship program where a group of peers can share their challenges. They hosted a wonderful retreat that Nicole and I attended at the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Gettysburg. And it was like continuing education for pastors. There were Episcopal, Presbyterian, and Lutheran pastors, and they were talking, the conversation got more real after a few days, where people were talking about their real challenges, that you can talk about care for the earth and being stewards of God's creation, but you can't talk about worshiping the earth. That's too pagan. It started talking about the boundaries, about the risks of being perceived as too political. On the last day, we were right there in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of Marcellus shale fracking going on. How do you talk to your congregations when there's a potential windfall associated with leasing the mineral rights to your land? And so one of the pastors led a sermon on God's grace being sufficient, as in opposition to this idea of leasing your land for fracking. So powerful stuff, and helping faith leaders feel that they're not alone as they're trying to engage in this type of work. Green Faith also has a 2-year certification program, which has a lot of nice structure. Over that 2 years, there's a lot of requirements, links to local environmental justice organizations, 3 ecologically themed environmental worship services per year. A lot of things that have been learned from community-based social marketing about making a public commitment. They did a lot of public news coverage of what these faith communities are doing. And Stacy Keneally here, she acts as a consultant. They've got a website with dedicated resources, and they really partner a lot. For example, they've partnered with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and there's a scholar named David Rhodes who created something called Lutherans Restoring Creation. So even to the individual Lutheran churches, they're saying, we've partnered with the leaders from your faith community in doing this work. They've got Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist faith communities that are also in the Green Faith certification and fellows programs. So even within those individual faith groups, is this going on with our higher ups? Is this something that's being endorsed at the highest levels of our organization? That to have that kind of reassurance and legitimacy matters. These are some images from the Green Faith certification program. They've got on the top left the Lenten carbon fast, which is an innovative approach to Lent. E-waste recycling days around Earth Day, outdoor environmental worship services, community gardens, designated parking for hybrid vehicles, encouraging carpooling and ride sharing to church or biking to church. Having this kind of checklist of potential recipes for action reduces a lot of that uncertainty, and creating mutual awareness of what other members of faith communities are doing helps facilitate what has been described as conditional cooperation, the recognition that others are similarly engaged, so other types of pro-social behavior, whether it's voting or donating to a charitable cause. You're more likely to do that if you believe that others that you identify with are also similarly engaged. And creating that mutual awareness can help take climate change from being this insurmountable problem to something that's being addressed in collaboration with like others. So that's some of the logic behind it. And Green Faith does a really nice job of recognizing trouble spots. So sometimes when you change practices, there's going to be resistance because it's deviant, it's different from what you've done in the past. So closing the doors to worship services, to congregational spaces to prevent heated and cooled air from escaping. When you want to seem welcoming and open and inviting to members of your faith community and newcomers, you might not want to close the doors, so you're letting all that heated air escape. So Green Faith does a lot of work with their partner congregations in talking about how to make this meaningful within that context, that it's not just an add-on. It's not just so that you can save money on your utility bills for your congregation because, you know, congregational budgets are strapped, but that this is stewardship of God's creation. This is meaningful within our context. This is in alignment with our faith tradition. So a lot of these folks have been increasingly engaged in political action. You can see the Reverend Sally Bingham from Interfaith Power and Light standing behind Arnie as he's signing AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act. Interfaith Power and Light has hosted lobby days, brought in folks from all over the state, from the Central Valley, to lobby in support of particular bills that are environmentally friendly. We are going to be hosting a Sacramento prayer breakfast in April. Mayor Kevin Johnson's going to open it. We're hoping to have Senator Fran Pavley, the author of AB 32, speak. We're going to have Sikh, Buddhist, Muslim faith leaders lead an interfaith prayer. And it's funny because as a social scientist, you're usually just involved in observing, sometimes participant observation, but I found myself getting very active and involved in doing some of this organizing myself. And of course, Bob Doppold has taken a leading role in, you know, pushing at the national level how climate change is a moral issue, pressuring President Obama to take more directed action towards addressing climate change. Rating our legislators in terms of their voting record on policies related to climate. And this is not novel. I mean, obviously, faith communities have a long-standing history of engaging in political action. But, you know, some of your more conservative, mainstream churches perhaps, you know, need a little encouragement knowing that others are similarly engaged to take these types of risks. So, and in yesterday's presentation, we heard about mental health and mental illness and the importance of using 12-step programs. This is an environmental faith initiative that's based on the 12-step model as a way to reducing our consumption. Consumption is being morally and spiritually bankrupt. An example of a recent Sierra Pacific Synod meeting that the Lutherans hosted, and the theme was for the love of God, caring for creation. And some of the faith congregations that I've been studying in my fieldwork, finding it more socially legitimate to become members of Green Faith's 2-year certification program, knowing that at the Synod level, which represents like 200 congregations in Northern California and Nevada, that this is something that's being backed at the larger context. So, and this is something that the White House and EPA have also been supportive of. There was a Greening America's Congregations Through Energy Efficiency that was held last September at the White House. Congregations that reduce their energy use by 10% can get a special recognition from the White House. Congregations that score 75 or better on the EPA's Energy Star rating on that 1 to 100 scale can be rated as an Energy Star congregation. I believe there's 36 nationwide that are currently represented, and Green Faith requires this as part of their 2-year certification program. We're working to get some additional support from the Department of Energy, hopefully to bring faith leaders that are involved in different types of work in this area together to share best practices and discuss challenges. Not unlike a forum like here, and we've discussed this with Karen, to have something like this at the Garrison Institute. So at the city level, you know, when you're designing programs, when you're thinking about engaging with your local institutions, again, it's very important to recognize that multiple logics inform human action, that people are socialized within institutions, that the social institutions can be leveraged to drive behavior change, but it needs to be done in a way that's seen as socially legitimate. And sometimes these are going to be changes that are novel for those existing institutions, and that obviously leaders in your community can be great messengers for change, but they need support, and support like these types of programs and fellowship gatherings can really help sustain faith leaders and other community leaders when they're engaged in this type of work. social change organizations like Interfaith, Power and Light, and Green Faith that create recipes for action and mutual awareness across networks of organizations can help fuel institutional change. Thanks.